So, a game for everyone is a game for no one. That is something that I've heard like throughout time, and that's something that I kind of wanted to address in this video. Um, I mainly upload like shorts on my channel right now, but I just kind of figured this could be my way of proving that I'm not a robot, right? This could be my first video on my channel, and I figure what better way to do that than to have this little point of discussion that we can flesh out. I wanted to address that because I keep hearing that, and I understand where that's coming from. What people mean to say is that game developers that sacrifice, dilute, or compromise the core foundation of their vision for the sake of mass appeal, that ultimately it results in this like mediocre product that doesn't really have much of like a strength in any real domain, particularly the audience that it should be catering to, right? And I feel like that is really the crux of the issue. Because I feel like when people say a game for everyone's a game for no one, like, I don't know if this is just me being a smartass, but I feel like most of the successful video game franchises have been, developed from the ground up to be for everyone. And examples would be like Pokemon, right? Mario, Minecraft, Fortnite, some of the most successful video games, of all time. And because of that, they were created from the ground up to be for everybody. And I guess that's kind of the key differentiator here compared to video games that have like some form of niche that are trying really hard to not be part of that niche, to be accessible to like the general audience, to the point that they compromise whatever vision they had along the way, and ultimately it just falls flat. And video game budgets are becoming so exorbitant to the point that a lot of these companies want to recoup as much of that cost as possible. And usually that comes in the form of things like microtransactions and stuff, but that's like a whole different can of worms. The point is, people are just trying to get more sales, right? Or the game developers are just trying to sell their game more to like a broader audience, but in doing so, they're compromising the people that they're catering to first before they even so much as begin to think about reaching out to like the general audience. And I feel like if you make a good game, people will flock to you. And the best example of that would be games like Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, Expedition 33, right? Elden Ring is a Souls game, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have the word Souls in it, but you get what I mean? Like, it's a game that's just riding off the heels of, like, its predecessors that are notorious for their difficulty. So much so that when Elden Ring dropped and it started making waves because the core fan base felt like, yeah, this is a great game. And then a lot of the people that may not have played any of the prior FromSoft titles were like, I've been hearing so much, I wonder what the fuss is all about. And then they check it out, they play the game, they're getting their ass beat by the Tree Sentinel. They're like, well, shit, how is this fun? And then they go on to Twitter or whatever platform and be like, yo, I feel like this game should have a difficulty option because that's their first experience with these FromSoft titles, right? And people are just met with like, or they're meeting with this person saying, well, just get good or this or that or that or this, right? And some people may be warded off by that. But I feel like a lot of people have come to realize that Elden Ring, it may not have a traditional, like, difficulty option in the context of being presented in the main menu with, like, what difficulty would you like to play? Story mode, casual mode, normal difficulty, expert difficulty, and all that jazz. But rather, the difficulty options are implemented in a fashion that's within the game systems. If you want the game to be easy, you can just get a strength-based weapon and just max out that strength stat, right? And just bonk things to death and learn how to dodge or something. Like, it's almost like you gotta earn that easy mode. And a lot of people would consider things like the Mimic tier to be easy mode, but I feel like you would have had to have gone through a significant portion of the game before you even have access to that and things like that. Some people may say sorcery, some people may say this or that build, this weapon, the moon veil, all that jazz. Like, yeah, like there's several ways to trivialize a lot of the game's challenges and difficulties, but I think that's the point where FromSoft didn't compromise their vision of like the traditional Souls game, of like that trial and error to cater to like this potential newer audience that may not be accustomed to this genre of game. You know what I mean? And because they stuck to their vision, I think that's ultimately what made Elden Ring super successful with its core fan base. But it also brought in a whole new wave of players that now they have these tools available to them that they didn't have in prior FromSoft titles, that made it so that they are better equipped to deal with the game's challenges. And that leads to an overall more pleasant and even rewarding experience, something that a lot of these people may not have experienced in their prior gaming experiences, right? And I believe that's what's important with these game developers, to understand who they're appealing to, so that they can then make that their core foundation and try to implement systems so that a newer generation of players, or like a newer fan base, a new wave, can come in and find value in it, whereas a lot of their previous titles may not have had those quality of life tweaks, so that they can then, accrue and build an ever-growing fan base. And not only that, but they grow as artists. And to piggyback off that, another example would be Expedition 33. Expedition 33 is a turn-based game, a genre that many have considered to be super niche, including the likes of Square Enix, where they insisted that people don't want to play these turn-based titles, saying, oh, that shit's in the past, right? But then you look at, all of the quality of life improvements that Expedition 33 made, so that they made it like a little bit more action focused, with the addition of parrying and dodging on top of the pre-existing, like the turn-based, more traditional turn-based combat from JRPGs, right? And the reason why that game was even made was because it was made by passionate developers that grew up playing those old school JRPGs, but they brought it forth to a more like quality of life, more modern, action-oriented audience, so that if you're not used to these turn-based titles, you kind of have that action engagement of like, well, now I have to focus on the parry, and now I have to dodge and all that jazz. So it's not just waiting for your turn, which a lot of these people may feel like that's the thing that turns them off from these genres. And a lot of these games, they do a lot of things right, but these little details add up, and it adds up to like an amazing experience. But it's the core foundation that I'm trying to get at here, where they knew that they were making a game that appeals to the JRPGs enthusiasts, but they're, keeping it as like the foundation, and everything else is supplemental, so as people that aren't so into these genres will find something that's appealing to it, you know what I mean? And with Baldur's Gate 3, when that came out, I remember like all these people that weren't really into CRPGs, they were playing this game because, again, it was making waves, everybody was raving and talking about it, so they checked it out. And then they found out, well, what the hell, like, why do I have to only move like a certain distance per turn? Why do I have to wait my turn and all that, right? And a lot of people, I remember like reading a lot of comments on social media saying, man, like, this game's good, and like I can see why people like it, but I just can't click with like the game's combat. It's just too slow. But the thing is, that's the nature of these types of games. It's a Dungeons and Dragons video game where you have to approach it more methodically, right? you should be able to, really think about your turn, because you think about what tools you have available to you, what items, what abilities, what resources, and you're presented with a situation, whether it be like tough enemies or maybe there's like obstacles in your way, and you can strategize and find ways to tackle these challenges accordingly. And a lot of these people aren't used to that. They're used to just, following the yellow pane, mashing the buttons. And that can be like a jarring whiplash to a lot of these people, so much so that their knee-jerk reaction is to, essentially say, well, why can't these things just cater more to my, understanding of gaming? And I feel like people should allow themselves to grow and to like play games that they may not be familiar with, but developers should also be conscientious of the general populace and like what changes they could make to improve their product, because that's an artist's goal, to always be improving. And there's always that middle ground where the artist has to meet the consumer like halfway. And I feel like a lot of these artists, they go too out of their way to meet these consumers that may not have ever even put forth the effort to really understand their art or their product to begin with. So what's the point of catering to these people if they were most likely just not going to be engaged at all? And if they do, they probably just dip their toes in for a little while and then they just move on to the next thing, right? And at that point, you created a product, catering to these types of people that don't really appreciate your work, to the point that you have created something that many people would find to be mediocre or not memorable, or they just drop it entirely partway through the playthrough because they feel there's just no artistic or entertainment value. And I just kind of wanted to open that discussion with this video to say that, I believe that you just need to understand who you're catering to and what systems, what layers, what tools you can implement so that you can, reach a broader audience without compromising the core of what it is you're trying to convey, what artistic expression, what just fun game you want to play, right, or want to make. And I just wanted to open that discussion and see if any of you guys feel similarly. If you want to comment on that, feel free to comment, and thank you so much for watching.